The first thing I noticed was the smell, cheap perfume, the kind that burns your nose with its artificial sweetness. It lingered in the car like a ghost, clinging to the air conditioning vents, wrapping itself around me as I gripped the steering wheel. That wasn't Emily's perfume. Emily wore something subtle, something floral that faded by the time she got home from a shift. This was aggressive, unfamiliar, and out of place. My hands tightened around the wheel as I tried to push the thought out of my head, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe a nurse at the hospital borrowed her car. Maybe one of her friends wore too much of it, and it rubbed off. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then I saw it, the seat. The passenger seat had been adjusted, moved far back, almost as if someone much taller than Emily had been sitting there. She barely came up to my chin. She always had to pull the seat forward when she drove. But now, it was pushed all the way back, as if someone had needed extra legroom, and that was when my stomach twisted. I wanted to ignore it, wanted to turn the key and drive away and never think about it again, but my gut wouldn't let me. I reached over, running my fingers along the fabric of the seat, searching for something, anything, that would make sense of what I was seeing. My fingers brushed against something cold. I looked down, and there it was. A cufflink. It sat there, small and silver, resting against the black upholstery like a flashing neon sign screaming at me that something was wrong. Emily didn't wear cufflinks. None of her friends did. I turned it over in my hand, looking for a marking, some kind of clue. There was an engraving on the back, 2 letters intertwined in a way that felt both elegant and obnoxious. It wasn't mine. It sure as hell wasn't mine. I sat there for a long time, staring at it, listening to the sound of my own breathing in the silent car. My thoughts were racing, slamming into each other so fast I couldn't hold on to any single one. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it had been there for weeks, months even, and I just never noticed. But I knew that wasn't true. I knew every inch of this car. I was the one who vacuumed it out every Sunday. I was the one who wiped down the seats, checked the oil, made sure everything was running the way it should. If this had been here before, I would have found it. The realization settled in, heavy and suffocating. Someone else had been in this car. Not just in it, but close enough, comfortable enough, to move the seat, to leave something behind. I swallowed hard, the taste of something bitter creeping up my throat. I should have confronted her right then and there. I should have stormed into the house, held up the cufflink, and demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I put it in my pocket, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white, and stepped out of the car. Inside, the house smelled like dinner, garlic, onions, something simmering on the stove. Emily stood at the counter, chopping vegetables, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, looking as calm and normal as ever. She turned when she heard me walk in, smiling in that easy way that used to make my chest feel warm but now only made my stomach churn. "Hey, you're home early," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "How was work?" I stared at her, searching her face for something: guilt, discomfort, a flicker of recognition. But there was nothing. Just Emily, standing in our kitchen, acting like everything was fine. "Fine," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "Busy?" She nodded, turning back to the cutting board, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I should have said something. I should have taken the cufflink out and placed it on the counter between us, watched her face as she tried to explain it away. But I didn't. Because I needed proof. Because if I was going to do this, if I was going to open this door, I needed to be damn sure I wasn't walking into a misunderstanding. So I stayed quiet. I sat at the table, eating the meal she made, pretending I didn't feel like throwing up with every bite. I asked about her day, listened as she talked about a difficult patient, nodded along like I was actually hearing her. But all I could think about was the cufflink in my pocket, burning a hole through my jeans, waiting for the moment I'd finally pull it out and demand the truth. That moment came sooner than I expected. That night, while Emily was in the shower, I went through her things. I told myself I wasn't that kind of person, that I respected her privacy, that I had no right to dig through her drawers like some jealous, insecure husband. But I ignored that voice. I opened her jewelry box, her bedside table, her purse. I checked the pockets of her jackets, the shelves in her closet, the bathroom cabinets. And then I found it. Tucked away in the back of her dresser, beneath a pile of folded sweaters, was a small black velvet bag. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I loosened the drawstrings and turned it upside down, watching as 2 cufflinks spilled onto the bedspread, identical to the one I'd found in the car. 3. There were 3 of them. I stared at them, the weight of their meaning pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just an accident. This wasn't just some random item left behind by a coworker or a friend. This was deliberate. This was hidden. I heard the water shut off in the bathroom, the sound of Emily stepping out of the shower, and panic shot through me. I shoved the cufflinks back into the bag, stuffed it into my pocket, and stood there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The bathroom door opened, and Emily walked out, towel wrapped around her, steam curling around her bare shoulders. She smiled when she saw me, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. "Everything okay?" she asked, drying her hair with the towel. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything, but the words got stuck in my throat. I had proof now. I had no doubt. But I still wasn't ready for the truth. Not yet. The next morning, I left the house before Emily woke up. I needed space, time to think, anything to keep me from saying something I couldn't take back. My shift at the firehouse didn't start for another few hours, but I drove there anyway, parked outside, and sat in my truck, staring at the dashboard. The cufflinks were still in my pocket, pressed against my leg like a reminder of the decision I needed to make. My gut was telling me one thing, but my brain kept trying to argue with it, searching for some logical reason why Emily would have them, why one had been in the car and the others hidden away in her drawer. Maybe they were a gift, something she bought for someone at work. Maybe they belonged to her father, and she had kept them for sentimental reasons. But none of it made sense, not the way she hid them, not the way the seat had been pushed back, not the perfume that still lingered in the car like a slap to the face. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through her social media, something I never did because I trusted her. Her last post was from a few days ago, a picture of her and some coworkers at a charity event for the hospital. She looked happy, arms around two of her friends, smiling at the camera. I scanned the faces of the men in the background, wondering if one of them owned the cufflinks in my pocket. The initials engraved on them didn't help. I didn't recognize them, and Emily never talked about anyone at work with those initials. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. If I asked her about them outright, she would have an answer ready. She wouldn't hesitate, wouldn't fumble over her words, because if she was hiding something, she had already prepared for this moment. She was too smart not to be ready for it. If I wanted to catch her off guard, I needed to be smarter. When my shift started, I forced myself to focus, to push everything to the back of my mind, at least while I was on a call. There was no room for distractions when you were hauling people out of burning buildings. But the moment I had a break, it all came crashing back, clawing at the edges of my thoughts. I had to do something. At lunch, I stepped outside and dialed a number I hadn't called in a while. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hey, man, long time." Jason's voice came through, casual and easy like always. "Yeah, been busy," I said, keeping my voice even. "Listen, you still have that buddy in security?" "Which one?" "The one who set up those cameras for you after your truck got broken into." Jason hesitated for a second, probably trying to figure out why I was asking. "Yeah, he still does that kind of thing." "Why, you need something?" I glanced around the parking lot, making sure no one was nearby. "I need cameras installed at my house. Something discreet." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "Man, you think someone's been in your house?" "Something like that," I said, not wanting to explain more. Jason didn't push. "I'll text you his number. He's good, won't ask questions. Just tell him what you need." "Thanks." I hung up and stared at my phone, feeling a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something a husband should have to do. But normal went out the window the moment I found those cufflinks. That evening, after my shift ended, I called the guy. His name was Eric, and he didn't waste time. He told me he could come by the next day, set up cameras in a few key spots: living room, hallway, bedroom, anywhere I needed. I told him I wanted everything covered. He gave me a price, and I agreed without hesitation. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, smiling like nothing had changed, like there wasn't a storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Long day?" she asked, swirling the wine in her glass. "Yeah," I said, taking off my jacket and hanging it over the chair. "You?" "Same as always," she said with a small shrug. "Busy, exhausting." I watched her, waiting for some sign, some flicker of guilt. But there was nothing. She took a sip of her wine, completely relaxed. Either she had nothing to hide, or she was a better liar than I ever gave her credit for. I sat down across from her, resting my arms on the table. "Hey, I meant to ask you, Found something weird in the car the other day. Her eyes flicked to mine, and I saw the slightest shift in her expression, so small I almost missed it. Weird how? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cufflink, setting it on the table between us. This was on the passenger seat. She frowned, picking it up and turning it over in her fingers. Huh. Never seen this before. Her voice was steady, natural. Too natural. You sure? I pressed, keeping my gaze locked on her. It was just sitting there. Thought maybe it was yours, or something you found at work. She shook her head, setting it back down. No idea. Maybe one of the guys at the hospital dropped it? Sometimes I give people rides if their cars are in the shop. I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. Who? She blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. What? Who did you give a ride to? She hesitated, just for a second. I don't know. Could have been anyone. I don't keep track. That was a lie. Emily kept track of everything. I nodded slowly, pretending to let it go. Yeah, maybe. She smiled, relieved that the conversation was over. You're being weird tonight, she said, picking up the cufflink and tossing it in the trash. It's probably nothing. Don't overthink it. I forced a chuckle, standing up from the table. Yeah, probably nothing. But I knew better. Tomorrow, the cameras would be installed. And soon, I'd know exactly what Emily was trying so hard to hide. Eric arrived the next afternoon, a quiet guy who didn't ask questions beyond what was necessary. He walked through the house with me, nodding as I pointed out the places I wanted covered, the entryway, the hallway leading to the bedroom, the kitchen, and most importantly, our bedroom. He asked if I wanted audio, and I told him yes. It cost extra, but I wasn't about to risk missing something important. He assured me the cameras were small, nearly impossible to notice unless you were looking for them. That was exactly what I needed. By the time he was done, the house looked the same as it always had. There was no sign that anything had changed, but now, every movement, every conversation would be recorded. Eric handed me a tablet that controlled everything, along with an app for my phone that would let me watch in real time. I thanked him, paid him in cash, and watched as he left, my hands tightening around the device that would either confirm my worst fears or prove I was losing my mind. Emily got home an hour later, dropping her bag by the door and heading straight for the fridge. I sat at the table, the tablet hidden in my lap, pretending to scroll through emails. She grabbed a bottle of water, leaning against the counter as she took a sip, her eyes flicking to me. You're home early, she said, tilting her head slightly. Slow day, I replied, not looking up. Chief let me off a couple hours early. She nodded, twisting the cap back onto the bottle. I was thinking we could go out tonight. Maybe grab dinner, see a movie. It was the first time she had suggested a date night in months. Maybe longer. I finally looked up, studying her face. Yeah, sure. Sounds good. She smiled, but there was something forced about it, like she was trying too hard. Great. I'll make a reservation. She walked off to the bedroom, and I waited until I heard the door close before unlocking my phone and opening the app. The screen split into 4 views, each showing a different part of the house in real time. The kitchen was empty, the hallway still, but the bedroom feed showed Emily sitting on the bed, her phone in her hands. I turned on the audio. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. Yeah, I'm free later. No, he's coming with me to dinner. I'll figure something out. My jaw clenched as I listened. She was lying to someone, making plans she didn't want me to know about. She ended the call quickly, shoving the phone into the drawer of her nightstand before standing and heading into the bathroom. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had no name, no idea who she was talking to, but I didn't need one. I had the truth right in front of me. Dinner felt like a performance. Emily smiled too much, laughed at things that weren't funny, reached across the table to touch my hand like we were newlyweds again. I played along, pretending I didn't notice the way her eyes flicked to the clock behind me every few minutes. When the check came, she excused herself to the bathroom, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I pulled out my own phone, opening the app. The house was empty, but I still checked the feeds, needing to see if anything had changed. The bedroom was exactly as we had left it, but the nightstand drawer was open. She had taken something with her. She returned a few minutes later, slipping her phone back into her purse as she smiled at me. Ready to go? I nodded, standing. In the car, she reached for my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. This was nice, she said softly. We should do this more often. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. Yeah, we should. She squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back. even as my other hand tightened into a fist in my lap. I knew what was coming, and I was ready for it. We got home a little after 9. Emily headed straight for the bedroom, claiming she was exhausted, while I stayed in the living room, pretending to watch TV. I waited until I heard the soft creak of the bed, the shifting of blankets as she settled in. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the app, switching the feed to our bedroom. The screen showed Emily lying under the covers, her phone in her hand, the glow of the screen illuminating her face in the dim room. She stared at it for a long time, fingers hesitating over the keyboard, before finally typing something and hitting send. I turned on the audio. Nothing for a few moments, just the faint rustle of sheets as she shifted positions. Then the phone vibrated against the nightstand. She picked it up immediately. "Hey," she whispered, voice soft, careful. "No, he's still awake. I don't know, maybe an hour." She listened for a moment, nodding slightly. "Yes, same place. Okay, I'll text when I leave." She ended the call, exhaled slowly, and set the phone down. I turned off the feed before the rage bubbling in my chest could take over. This was it. The confirmation I needed. There was no more doubt, no more excuses, no more searching for reasons that didn't exist. Emily was meeting someone. She was sneaking out of our bed, out of our house, to be with another man. My wife, the woman I had trusted for nearly a decade, had been lying to my face without a flicker of hesitation. I locked my phone, shoved it into my pocket, and leaned back against the couch. My hands were shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs, but I forced myself to stay still. If I confronted her now, she would lie. She would twist it, make excuses, try to manipulate the situation until I was the one feeling guilty. I wasn't going to give her that chance. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to watch her walk out that door. I waited. An hour passed. Then another. At 11:45, Emily finally moved. I switched back to the camera feed just as she slid out of bed, moving carefully, quietly. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, checked the screen, and typed something quickly before grabbing a small bag from the closet. She didn't even glance toward my side of the bed, didn't hesitate or second-guess herself. She walked straight to the door, eased it open, and stepped into the hallway. I stayed perfectly still as she crept past the living room, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. The sound of keys jingling in her hand, the quiet click of the front door unlocking, the slow exhale as she stepped outside, all of it felt like a hammer driving the final nail of our marriage. The door shut softly behind her. I exhaled slowly, forcing the anger down before it could take control. Then I stood up and followed. I moved quickly, slipping through the kitchen and toward the side window, careful to stay in the shadows. Through the blinds, I watched as Emily walked to her car, glancing over her shoulder once before climbing in and starting the engine. The headlights flicked on, cutting across the driveway, illuminating the street ahead. She pulled out smoothly, turning left at the stop sign at the end of our block. I was already moving. I grabbed my keys from the counter, stepped outside, and got into my truck, keeping the engine off as I watched her taillights disappear around the corner. I waited a few seconds, just enough to put some distance between us, then started the truck and followed. She had no idea. She thought she was careful, thought she was smarter than me, thought she could sneak out in the middle of the night and come back before morning without me ever knowing. She was wrong, and by the time this night was over, she was going to regret ever thinking she could fool me. Emily drove like she had done this 100 times before. There was no hesitation, no glancing in the rearview mirror to check if someone was following, no nervous fidgeting. She wasn't cautious, but she wasn't reckless either. She knew exactly where she was going. That was the part that hit me the hardest, how natural it all seemed. Like this was part of her routine, like it wasn't the first time she had snuck out of our house in the middle of the night to meet someone who wasn't her husband. I stayed 3 cars behind, letting traffic act as my cover, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Every time she flicked on her turn signal, every time her brake lights glowed in the darkness, my stomach twisted tighter. She wasn't heading toward downtown, where most people went for late-night meetups. She wasn't going to a bar, or a restaurant, or even a friend's house. Instead, she took a series of smaller streets, the kind of roads that didn't have heavy traffic this late at night, the kind where nobody would think twice if they saw her car parked somewhere it didn't belong. She turned onto a quiet road lined with closed shops and warehouses, the kind of place people ignored unless they had a reason to be there. I felt my pulse in my throat as I watched her signal right and pull into a parking lot. A motel. Not a nice one, not even a chain. One of those places that barely looked functional, where the neon vacancy sign flickered like it was about to die. The kind of place people went when they didn't want anyone to know they were there. I didn't pull in right away. Instead, I drove past, my heart slamming against my ribs as I glanced through the windshield. Emily's car rolled into a spot near the far end of the building, partially hidden from the road, the kind of spot someone chose when they didn't want their cars seen. She shut off the engine but didn't get out. She sat there, looking down at something in her hands, probably her phone, waiting. I turned onto a side street and parked where I had a clear view but wasn't obvious. My hands felt like they didn't belong to me as I reached for my phone, pulling up the camera app with fingers that barely worked. I didn't know what I was expecting, what I was bracing myself for, but I knew I couldn't look away. Then another car pulled in. Sleek, black, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. A newer model, expensive, the kind of car driven by someone who wanted people to know they had money. It pulled into a spot 2 spaces down from Emily's, and the second it came to a stop, she moved. She got out of her car quickly, like she had been waiting for this exact moment. She smoothed her clothes, ran a hand through her hair, and walked toward the black car with the kind of ease that made my stomach turn. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't second-guessing herself. The driver's side door opened. And then I saw him. Ryan. Doctor. Hospital staff. One of those men who walked around like they were untouchable, like the world existed just to accommodate them. I had met him before. Emily had mentioned him in passing, nothing more than a name attached to a work story. But now, standing there in the dim glow of the motel's exterior lights, I knew exactly who he was to her. Emily reached him, and before she even said a word, he pulled her in by the waist. She didn't resist. She leaned into him, tilted her chin up, and let him kiss her. I felt my entire body lock up. Every muscle in my body tensed at once, my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might break. My breathing slowed to something mechanical, controlled only by the sheer force of my will. If I let it go, if I let the rage take over, I wouldn't be able to stop myself. I could have gotten out of the truck. I could have stormed over, grabbed him by the collar, and shattered the entire moment. I could have made a scene, screamed her name, forced her to look me in the eye while the weight of her betrayal crashed down around her. But I didn't. I forced my fingers to steady themselves, forced my hands to hold the phone still, and I hit record. The camera captured everything. Emily's arms around him, his hands gripping her waist. The way she laughed against his lips, the way they stood there like they had all the time in the world, completely unbothered by the fact that she had a husband at home who had trusted her. I zoomed in, focusing on Ryan's face, making sure it was clear. Then I panned over to the motel room door. They weren't even being careful. There was no hesitation, no glancing around to see if someone might be watching. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a keycard, handing it to her like it was a normal thing, like this was just another night for them. She took it, fingers brushing his as she did, and turned toward the room. She unlocked the door. She stepped inside. She didn't look back. Ryan leaned against his car for a moment, scrolling through his phone, waiting, probably letting her get settled before following. I ended the recording. My hands felt like ice as I saved the video, backing it up in multiple places, making sure I had it secured. There was no way in hell I was losing this. I should have felt something more. Anger. Grief. Rage so hot it made me want to drive my truck straight into his car just to wipe that smug expression off his face. But in that moment, I felt nothing at all. Because it was over. Everything. The life I thought I had, the woman I thought I knew, the marriage I had spent years building, every last bit of it had just shattered into pieces, and I was the only one who had seen it happen. But they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even go home. I parked a few streets away from the motel and sat in my truck, watching from a distance, letting the weight of everything settle. The video on my phone played back on a loop, every second of it hammering the reality deeper into my skull. I had all the proof I needed, but proof wasn't enough. Emily had destroyed our marriage without hesitation, without guilt, and I wasn't going to let her walk away from this like nothing had happened. She had made her choice, and now it was my turn. By the time she finally left the motel, it was nearly 4 in the morning. She walked out first, alone, adjusting her clothes as she made her way to the car, checking her phone as if she were just another person finishing a normal night. A few minutes later, Ryan followed, looking just as casual, stretching his arms before unlocking his car and driving off in the opposite direction. Emily sat in her car for a moment before finally pulling out, heading back toward our home like she hadn't just spent the night with another man. I let her go, but I wasn't far behind. I gave her enough time to get home and slip into bed, enough time for her to fall into whatever weak sleep she could manage. Then I walked through our front door like nothing was different. The house was dark and quiet, and when I stepped into our bedroom, she was curled up on her side, pretending to be asleep. I knew she wasn't. She had spent the night with him, probably kept checking the time, making sure she left early enough to be back before I noticed. I didn't wake her. I didn't say anything. I just sat on the edge of the bed, looking at her, knowing that by the time the sun set again, everything she thought she had would be gone. That morning, I took the day off work, telling my chief that something personal had come up. Then I made my first call to a lawyer. I wasn't going to waste time. The moment I laid out the situation and forwarded the video as proof, he assured me that the divorce papers would be ready within hours. The state's laws were clear. Adultery, when proven, could have consequences, and I was going to make sure Emily felt every last one of them. Next, I made another call, this one to Ryan's hospital. I didn't say much, just enough to get through to their HR department, where I politely asked if they had a policy regarding workplace affairs between staff members. When they asked why, I simply sent them the video. I waited. Emily didn't suspect anything. She moved through the day like she always did, making breakfast, kissing me on the cheek, acting like she was the same devoted wife she had always pretended to be. I played along, but when I left, I wasn't going to work. I was preparing for the end. The lawyer had the divorce papers ready by noon. He was efficient, precise, and brutal. He laid it out clearly. With the evidence I had, I could push for the house, for assets, for an outcome that left Emily with nothing but regret. I took the papers and left his office, but I wasn't done yet. The real moment came later that evening. I got home early, making sure to set everything up before she arrived. I connected my phone to the living room TV, opened the video file, and set it to play on a loop. Then I sat down and waited. Emily walked through the door, smiling at me like she had every other night, dropping her bag on the counter, stretching her arms. "Hey, you're home early," she said, heading toward the kitchen. "Dinner plans are—" She stopped. The sound of her own voice echoed through the living room. "Yeah, I'm free later." "No, he's coming with me to dinner. I'll figure something out." She turned, her face already losing color, her body going stiff as she stared at the screen. The video played on, frame by frame, exposing every touch, every whisper, every second of her betrayal in crystal-clear detail. She didn't move. I sat there, arms crossed, watching her the same way I had watched the footage a dozen times before. "Mark, don't." My voice was calm. Too calm. "Don't say anything. Just watch." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting back to the screen, where she and Ryan stood in that parking lot, wrapped around each other, completely unaware of the camera capturing every disgusting moment. She covered her mouth with her hand, her breathing shaky, her legs trembling as she stumbled back a step. "How long?" I asked, my voice sharp but even. She didn't answer. "How long, Emily?" Her lips parted, but nothing came out. "Was it just him?" I pressed. "Or are there more?" "Mark, please," she whispered, finally turning to look at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "It's not." "Not what?" I stood up, walking toward her slowly, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Not what it looks like. Not serious? Not something you were ever going to tell me about." She shook her head quickly, tears welling in her eyes. "I made a mistake." "No," I said, my voice cold. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or saying something you don't mean. This is a choice. A choice you made over and over again." "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did," I told back, my jaw tight. "And now, I'm going to return the favor." I reached for the envelope on the table, flipping it open and pulling out the divorce papers. I dropped them in front of her, watching as her hands trembled when she picked them up, her eyes scanning the words, realization hitting her like a brick wall. "You can sign them now," I said, my voice steady. "Or you can drag this out and make it worse for yourself. Either way, we're done." She shook her head again, more tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, Mark, don't do this. Don't do this." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Emily, you did this. You made this choice, and now you have to live with it." She sobbed, gripping the papers so tightly they crumpled in her hands, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to comfort her. I wasn't going to let her weasel her way out of this. She had destroyed our marriage, our trust, our life together. I walked past her, heading for the door, my voice calm and final. "You have until tomorrow to move out." I left. I didn't look back. And for the first time in weeks, I finally felt free.